We know a lot about Avraham. We know a lot from Midrashim, we know less, but still a significant amount from the Torah itself, who discusses him in different places. From the beginning, which we already read a few weeks ago, Lech Lecha, Avraham is introduced to us out of nowhere. Go! The first thing we know about him is that he goes. And if you really spoke about this a little bit yesterday at Shal Shudas, for anyone who was there, that really defines Avraham. He's a person who's always going. He's always going, he's always changing. He's always never happy with the status quo. His goal in life is always to make things better, to make people closer to God, and to see how he can improve everything. The end of last week's Parshas Vayera that we just read yesterday, is obviously the event, the seventh Aliyah is the event of the Akedah. Akedah Yitzchak, where Avraham is told by God to take his son, to bring him onto an altar, and to shecht him, to kill him. And this event, is a very difficult event. Probably one of the most difficult events in the Torah. One of the most difficult for us to understand, theologically, emotionally, any adjective you want to describe. Yet it's an event that we read about a lot. We read about it yesterday, Parshas Vayera. For those that can remember all the way back to Rosh Hashanah. Besides all the cooking, we also read the Akedah on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. Besides for just reading it, the Tefillot, all half of the Musaf, is related to the Akedah. In fact, if you want to take that approach, if you look in Midrashim, if you look hard enough, it's really almost possible. I didn't look that hard, but I could have done much more research. But it's really almost possible to find sources that tie the Akedah to almost everything. You can find sources that say in the schus of the Akedah, this happened, and this mitzvah is in the schus of the Akedah. And really, the Akedah seems to be a central theme in Judaism in many, many different realms. So what I want to discuss today is the source of Abraham's strength. Where did Abraham get the koach, the energy, the emotional ability to follow, to want to follow the command, to take away his only son? So I thought perhaps by analyzing Abraham's life, and we'll look at 3 different episodes, the first one rather briefly, the second one more at length, and the short one very briefly, the third one very briefly, to see if maybe looking at different events that the Torah tells us about his life, leaving the Midrashim aside, where perhaps we see that he got the source to carry this out. We got the strength of it, the source of his strength. So if we look on your sheet, source 1. The first thing I want to talk about is Haran's death. For those of us who aren't familiar with Haran is introduced to us in the first source, Bereshis, Perek Yud Aleph, the 11th chapter, Bereshis, Pasuk 27 and 28. Ve'ela toldos Terach. These are the generations, these are the children of Terach. Terach halid es Avraham, es Nachor, es Haran, v'Haran halid es Lot. Terach, we know, is Avraham's father. Terach is Avraham's father, and he also had 2 other children. He had Haran, and he had Nachor. Haran we don't hear about for a very long time, because already in the next pasuk, we hear, the very next pasuk, pasuk 27, we hear he's born, pasuk 27, he dies. Vayamas Haran al pnei Terach aviv be'eretz moladato be'or kasdim. Haran died al pnei Terach aviv. Al pnei Terach aviv. It's a very interesting wording. Literally translated, al pnei Terach aviv, he died on the face of his father. So what is that supposed to mean to us? Is the first question. The second question is, who cares? Why do we need to know about Haran at all? Okay, he's Lot's father, and Lot obviously plays more of a significant role than Haran does. We hear about him more than once. We hear about him doing different activities. But why do we care about Haran? So the first question is, what is Al Pnei Terach Aviv? So we turn to Rashi, source 2. Al Pnei Terach Aviv, on the face of his father. Rashi says, B'chayei Aviv. What this means is that Haran died during his father's lifetime. He died young. He obviously did not die in childbirth, which is probably very common then and was common here until 100 years ago. He didn't, because he had his son. He obviously lived long enough that Haran was able to get married and give birth to his own child, Lot, and maybe others. But he died while his father Terach was still alive. The Ibn Ezra in source 3 describes it even more significantly. Al pnei lifnei aviv, shemet ve'aviv ro'eh. Not only did he die during his father's lifetime, but when he died, his father saw him die. I don't need to tell you how traumatic that event would be. I think we don't have to discuss it at length. I don't know who's in the room. I don't know people's personal experiences. But if chas v'shalom, anyone had to ever experience or heard of experience, anyone who would lose a child. Losing a child in childbirth is obviously terrible, but losing a child who has been your child, your kid. You hear about these circumstances and they're just probably the most horrific thing. Losing a child. And more textually in source 4, how does Ibn Ezra know that this is what al pnei means? If you look in the more famous pasuk in Midbar Perek Gimel pasuk Daled, the first half of the pasuk is more famous, but is not what I want to focus on. Vayamas Nadav ve'Avihu, when Nadav and Avihu died, Lifnei Hashem, they died before God. V'yikrava me'esh lara, they brought a korban that was foreign. Lifnei Hashem, in front of God. What exactly they did wrong there, a topic for another time. But Midbar Sinai, this happened in the desert. Uvanim lo hayu lahem, they had not yet had children of their own. They were not even married yet. But this is the important part at the end of source 4. Vayechahen Elazar v'Yisamar al pnei Aharon avihem. Elazar and Itamar kohened as a verb. They acted as kohanim. When did they do that? Al pnei Aharon avihem. With their father, in front of their father. That's how we know that the word al pnei means in front of. That's what Ibn Ezra sourced, and Ibn Ezra at the very end of his comment from before quoted this pasuk, referred us to this pasuk, Chumahu al pnei Aharon avihem. And in brackets you see there the source that we just looked at. So why do I think this has to do with the source of Avraham's strength? That's our first point. And even though I titled the Shir Source of Avraham's Strength, the more I've been thinking about it, I'm not sure that all the points we're going to say are the source of Avraham's strength, but at least are relevant to the situation. So I think, I'm not saying it's 100% you have to agree with this, but I think it's interesting. The fact that we have no reason to believe that Avraham in his life had ever experienced personally, who knows what happened out there. Maybe this is the first time the Torah tells us that a son died, a child died in their father's lifetime. This unnatural, horrific event that we discussed a minute ago. But it's definitely the first time that Avraham is experiencing it so close to home. So I think it's possible to argue that when Avraham was asked to bring his son Yitzchak, to go ahead and kill him, even though he understood that if you take a blade of a knife to someone's throat and there's blood and then they're dead, like you don't have to be a genius to understand that, perhaps cognitively he didn't really know what it means to lose a son. What that means, what the aftermath is, what the reality of such an event, how dramatic and tragic and horrific it is. Yet experiencing the loss of his brother, and also relating to his father who had lost a child, I think it removes some of the cognitive dissonance that he could have experienced at the Akedah, but now that we know this is part of his background, he didn't. So I'm not sure if that's the source of his strength, and perhaps even makes it even harder. The challenge he's asked to do is go ahead and kill his own son when he's seen how painful it is for his father to lose a son. So I think that's definitely something we can think that Avraham had running through his mind as he walked with Shnei Na'arav up the mountain. That's the first point. Second point I'd like to focus on is sending Yishmael away, and we'll spend the majority of the shir on this topic. Avraham sends Yishmael away. Yishmael and Hagar actually leave Avraham and Sarah twice. We won't focus on the first time, though. If you look at the first time more carefully, and I just realized that this year, Sarah doesn't actually send Hagar away. She just makes her life so miserable that Hagar runs away. I don't know if that's really so different, but it's interesting. But that's the first time that Hagar goes away. Then Hagar comes back, right? Hagar comes back and they're living amongst them again. But let's take a step back. Before we talk about sending Yishmael away, which we'll read about in Perek Kaf Aleph in the 21st chapter of Bereshis, what happened earlier? Chapter 17, source 5. Let's just take a look at this few of these psukim, what these psukim describe. I apologize, there's no English on the sheet. I'll translate as we go. Please ask a question if you're not following, if you need a clarification at any time. What these psukim describe is the story, the happy story, of when Avram and Sarah are told they're going to have a kid. When they're told that Yitzchak will be born to them. So if I asked you, if I stopped you right now or before the shir, what was their immediate reaction? You'll tell me. Laughing. Right? They laughed. Avram laughed. Sarah then pretended she didn't laugh. They named the kid Yitzchak because of the laughter. We all know about the laughing. But what was actually the first thing that came out of his mouth? First words. Obviously laughter came out first. What were the first words that came out of Abraham's mouth when he was told that he was going to have his own kid after davening for so long? Source 5. Right, so God promises Abraham, you will be blessed, and I'll give you a child. A lot of blessings. Verse 17 is Yud Zayin. Vayipol Avraham al panav vayitzchak. Right? Obviously, before he was told about the kid more. And so, what does Avraham do? His first reaction is laughter, as we said. He falls on his face. Maybe he was saying Tachnun and fell and laughed. Vayomer belibo. He said in his heart, meaning he said to himself. He thought, Halaven mea shana yivaled. Can someone who's 100 years old have a kid? Ve'im Sarah havas tishim shana teled. Can my wife? She's 90. She's going to have a kid? She's going to have a son? That's crazy. It's a miracle. It's crazy. We'll see what different Mefarshim take different approaches to the laughter. Not really the topic today, but just in brief. So the Ramban, Onkelos, and others, they think the laughter was a laughter of happiness. How we would normally think of laughter. They're so happy. They've been davening for so long. Their prayers have finally been answered. Rav Shimshon Mefal Hirsch, says the laughter is ironic. And we'll see in a second why I quoted you of Rav Hirsch, not about this topic, but maybe I'll explain the Rav Hirsch before we look at the other Rav Hirsch I did quote, because they're related. What's the first thing that comes out of Avram's mouth in the pasuk that I bolded for you in Yud Chet 18? Source 5, bolded pasuk Yud Chet. Vayomer Avraham, and Avraham said El Elokim to God, Lu Yishmael Yichyeh Lefanecha. Lu Yishmael Yichyeh Lefanecha. Would it not be good enough if Yishmael would live before you? Or, oh, that Yishmael would live before you. So what does this pasuk mean? And then it continues on, a few more pasukim, Vayomer Elokim aval Sarai shtecha, you'll let us bet. No, she's going to have the kid, it'll be good, and yada yada. So what does this pasuk mean? Lu Yishmael Yichyeh Lefanecha. I feel like it doesn't get enough attention when we hear the parsha in shul, when we learn the parsha. We're all told of the laughter. But what about what he actually said? And should the laughter perhaps be understood in light of what he actually said? Now, laughter is a reaction, something you don't necessarily control. Somebody says something funny, you just laugh. You can't help it. But what did he actually say? Source 6. Rabbi Samson Rafal Hirsch, on this pasuk, on our pasuk, Bereshit 17:18. How unsuitable must the child be that was already there? Speaking of Yishmael, I apologize from the earlier Rav Hirsch. For those who aren't familiar with his work, lived in Germany, the mid-1800s. He was a very interesting thinker, modern for his time to a certain extent. But he wrote in German, so that his work is translated to both Hebrew and English. This is the old English translation, so please put on your Shakespearean hats as we try to understand what he's saying here. How unsuitable must the child be that he was already there? That was already there, referring to Yishmael. How unsuitable is Yishmael that to found the promised future, which was only to be formed by one child, such overpowering and changing the ordinary conditions of nature was necessary. What Rav Hirsch understands is that what Avraham is saying to God is, really? I really need another kid? Yeah. What about Yishmael? He's already here. You're going to go ahead and do Nisim. We know from other places in Tanakh and other Rishonim in different places, the Ramban and by Kriyas Yamsuf and others, that God doesn't like to do miracles. He sets up the Derech HaTeva, the way nature goes. He sets that up, and he would like for the nature to be the way it is. He only does miracles when they're absolutely necessary, and it's not something that God, quote-unquote, enjoys doing. So Avraham is saying here, a miracle is happening. A 100-year-old man and a 90-year-old woman are having a kid. How terrible must Yishmael be as a person? There's no way to change him? There's no way to fix him that he can be my progeny? Continuing in the Rav Hirsch, end of the second line. Hence the utterance, Lu Yishmael Yichyeh Lefanecha. Oh, that Yishmael might live before your presence. Might not he be able to carry on the promise, satisfy your demand, Lehisalech Lefanecha, to walk before you? At least partly to live up to it, to have part of the promise. Even if he did not walk always before you, at least he could not live before your presence? We started this year by quickly describing Avraham's life. And I said if I had to summarize Avraham in one character trait, I would say someone who's not happy with the status quo. In light of that, I think this makes perfect sense. Avraham is known as a nefesh asher asu b'charan. Avraham was someone who brought people in. He made souls. He brought people closer to monotheism. He taught them about God, about Judaism, whatever that meant at the time. And now he has his own son. And what God is basically telling him by saying, I'm going to give you a son, Yitzchak, is that there's no way you can be Makarev, your own son. There's no way you can make your own son good enough that he can be the next leader of the Jewish people. To Avraham, a man who never believes in the status quo, a man who couldn't stand the fact that Sodom and Gomorrah were going to be destroyed, who had to argue for that, a man who jumped into the Kivshan Eish, according to the Midrash, who left Lecha, he got up and went when God told him. He never liked what was there. He believed everything and anything could change. He's being told your son can't change. He can never change to be good enough to go ahead and be the next leader of the Jewish people. That's heartbreaking. And I think based on that interpretation, source 7, we'll skip it just for the sake of time, but basically Rashi says the same thing as Rav Hirsch. Doesn't say it as explicitly. He doesn't say it in German or English, but he says basically the same thing as Rav Hirsch. Rav Hirsch obviously coming many, many years after Rashi, so probably basing himself on Rashi to a certain extent, though he does not quote him. But with this understanding of what going through Avraham's head, he's not so happy about Yitzchak. Obviously he's happy to have another kid. He's probably happy for his wife, Sarah, who's never had a child. Obviously he's going to be happy for her. But it's essentially, as we're saying, here's a shtuch. God's basically saying, you can't change him. Not everyone can change to become, maybe obviously he doesn't have to be a Rasha, but not everyone can be the next leader of Klal Yisrael. So with that in mind, I think the story of sending Yishmael away makes a lot more sense. Source 8, Bereshit chapter 21. V'tireh Sarah es ben Hagar, hamitzris asher yaldal Avraham mitzachek. Sarah sees Yishmael mitzachek. What exactly mitzachek means? Also interesting, obviously it's the lashon of tzchok, the same lashon of language of laughter coming up again. Simply it means mocking. The Midrashim want to make it much worse. Rashi obviously says he was doing avodas idol worship, he was murdering people, he was engaged in all sorts of terrible things. It's an interesting Midrash. It makes sense with Rashi in general. If we're familiar with Rashi, at least in my understanding of Rashi's view of Tanakh, Rashi sees Rashi sees every character in Tanakh either black or white. And if you're a little bit bad, Rashi will quote every Midrash to make the character sound as bad as possible. And if you're a little bit good, Rashi will quote every Midrash to make you sound as good as possible. Rashi doesn't really see characters to Tanakh as having a gray area. So he quotes every Midrash here about how bad Yishmael was. But that's interesting because you have to realize Avraham, as we'll see in the next passage, what does Avraham say? But Tomer Avraham, Geresh Hamahazos, Vespana. Sarah says to Avraham, get rid of this kid, get rid of Yishmael, and get rid of Hagar. Because I don't want this kid inheriting with my kid. I don't want Yishmael hanging around. This is very bad, unappealing, uneinteresting in Abraham's eye. So what I said, the only question I have on Rashi is when he makes it sound like he was murdering people, he was doing idol worship. Would Abraham really want to keep him around? If we have to say what he was doing was bad enough that Sarah wanted to get rid of him, but not bad enough that we can somehow understand Abraham obviously wanted to keep his kid around. We all understand we have children, we understand that we love our children no matter what they do, but if your kid's murdering people, it's safer for him to be in jail or not there than to be with your other son. So Rashi, I find Rashi's quoting of the Midrash a little, it's interesting. But to focus on our point, so we see this machloket, this disagreement between Sarah saying get rid of him, and Avraham saying keep him. So who's going to be machriya? And we know that we have we have one source here, one source here. We need a third. We need a third machriya. We need someone to be the deciding factor. So who's there? God. God says in verse 12, Yudbet Vayomer Elokim El Avraham Al Yireh Beinecha O Hana'ar Val Masecha. Don't worry too much about this. Kol Asher Tamar Lecha Sarah Shma B'Kola. Everything your wife tells you, listen to her. I'm sure we've all quoted that at some point. Or at least everyone in this room, maybe not me. But so everything your wife says, listen to her. If you haven't quoted it, feel free to quote at some point today. But everything your wife says, you have to listen to her. And so Yishmael leaves. Yishmael leaves with Hagar. We know the story. He gives her one thing of water.
Why was that? He was a rich man. Why did he send him with one thing of water?
It's interesting. Yeah. So
it didn't make sense to me.
We don't have time to deal with the why, but I do want to focus on the one jug of water. Let's not focus on the why right now, though I think it's very interesting. What about what are the repercussions? We think of the two events. trying to put the event of sending Ishmael away in a little bit of a different context. He sent him away with one jug of water into a barren desert. Essentially, I don't know if I've never thought about it this way until I really thought about it. Essentially, he's sending Ishmael to death. Essentially, this is the Akedah part 1. He's sending Ishmael and Hagar. Okay, he's not taking a knife and cutting his throat, but he's saying, here's one thing of water, here's a big desert, have fun. And he's been doing it begrudgingly, obviously. He doesn't want to do it. Sarah's saying do it, God's saying listen to Sarah. But he has this opportunity, he has this event where he's sending his son to certain death. Now you might say to me, what do you mean certain death? God already promised him that Ishmael will be the head of a great nation, right? So obviously he'll be fine, he has a promise. God also promised him that Yitzchak will be the head of the Jewish people. Right. Now he's being told to take a knife to his neck. So really the stories are very, very similar. Both have promises they'll be the head of great nations. Both are being sent to certain death. And the third point is, if you think about the end of both of the stories, both are saved by an angel. And I think it's not by coincidence that these stories are connected. If you look at source 8, the very last line of the page, still on the front side, what's the underline? The underlined word, the one I bolded and underlined? When does he send him away? Vayishkem Avraham baboker. Vayikach lechem, he takes a little bread, v'chamas maim, little water, vayiten el Hagar, sam al shichma, v'esayele, v'eshacha v'telech v'tachas bar be'er sheva. He sends her away. Vayishkem Avraham baboker. Is that familiar to anyone? How does the Akedah start? Vayishkem Avraham baboker.
When he took Yitzchak.
I think the Torah itself is making this connection. They're the same story. It's happened before. The title of this year is The Source of Avraham's Strength. So, I don't know. I think it can be looked at both ways. One way, this is kind of very black, but perhaps it's the source of Avraham's strength is, he's already done this before. He's killed his son before. Now he's being asked to kill his second son. Perhaps he, quote-unquote, has experience in killing his sons. Maybe that makes it a little bit easier. On the other hand, which I have to admit I relate to much more, which is despite my title, he only had 2 kids. He already killed one. If he kills this kid, he has none. He has nothing left. And his whole point is to change the world. Abraham's essence is to make the world a more monotheistic place. If he goes ahead and kills his second son, who's going to do that for him? Who's going to continue? So maybe that makes the Akedah 1,000 times harder than we even thought it was. Before we move on to our third point and begin to wrap up, I do want to just point out, you'll see that there's a bunch of underlines on your page on the same source we've been discussing. So, yeah?
At what point did Ishmael come back after Avraham didn't come up?
Pardon me?
Ishmael didn't come back to Avraham until after the Akedah? Like this whole
So I'll peep Pshat and I'll peep Midrash. I'll peep Pshat. The first time we see the word Ishmael is when they bury Avraham. The only time Ishmael comes back al pi pshat is burying Avraham. He's disappeared till then. The Midrashim say that one of the 2 Na'ars, so according to the Midrash, I said, this year is really relying on the Pshat more than the Midrash, because for a few different reasons, but one of them specifically is that al pi pshat, one of the 2 Na'ars, one of the 2 lads who accompanied him on the Akedah, one was Ishmael. So obviously that would make, if Ishmael was already, I think the point is still true, that he's still this experience, but it's less true. Because if Ishmael already came back, then, but Al Pi the Pshat was just as 2 Na'ars, we don't know who they are.
Same thing with the south, only at the end.
Right.
It came to bury it. Right.
But let's take a look here, before we wrap up in our third and final point. Look at all these underlined words, and tell me if anything jumps out at you. Now maybe take 30 seconds and just look at all the underlined words and tell me if you see any sort of pattern. 1 second. We're in source 8. Yeah, what do you think?
Sarah tries to depersonalize him.
Right.
She calls him Ben Hagar, her son. He's not going to, my son, but Yitzchak, and then Avraham is upset over his son.
Right, so we know, being very careful with the analogy I'm about to make, we know that in the Holocaust, one of the reasons the Nazis gave the Jews numbers was to make them not people.
Right.
It's very hard to kill a person. You know their name, you know what they do, you know their address. It's still unbelievable to us how they could have done anything they did. But to go ahead and kill someone who's sitting there with a number, they're not a person, they're an animal. And they had just a number. Just like cattle has numbers, these people were just cattle. They took away their names. I think we see the same thing here in the Torah, that someone, whether it's Sarah, whether in the way the Torah presents this story, Ishmael's name is deleted. If you look again at the Psukim, Betera Sarah sees at Ben Hagar, Hagar's son. And that's Ishmael, but he's not called Ishmael, Ben Hagar. The next pasuk, B'tomer l'Avraham geresh ha'amazos, get rid of this Amma, not Hagar, get rid of this Amma, and who et b'na, and her son. Neither of their names appear. At the end of the pasuk, so we'll leave the end of it for a second. Pasuk Yud Aleph again. But this thing appeared very badly in Avram's eyes, Odat Beno, his son. Yud Bet. We again had, God says, see, it's not only Sarah, it's the whole way the Torah says the story. It's the quote-unquote narrator, the way the Torah presents the story. Even God says Beno, right, in Source Yud Bet, Al Hana'ar, the end of the pasuk, and then again, Yud Gimel, Ben Ha'amah, the son of this Amah, the Yud Dalet again, by Es Hayeled, every possible imaginable word that you could use for kid is there. And Ishmael's name is God, and I didn't bring the next 4 or 5 psukim continue the same way. And on the other hand, Yitzchak's name is purposely put in there for no reason. Look at pasuk Yud, pasuk 10. What's the end of the pasuk? Ki lo yirash, this is Sarah speaking. Lo yirash ben ha'amazos im b'ni. The pasuk could end it there. This kid, Yishmael, will not get the inheritance, will not stay around with my son. Yet the pasuk doesn't. It says, my son, im Yitzchak. It's like almost, what's the point? You can either say my son, or you can say your kid's name. You don't have to say both. She seems to stress Yitzchak's name while obliterating Yishmael's name. I thought that was interesting. Finally, we'll skip source 9 just for the sake of time. But finally, so we've discussed, just to summarize in the last 3 minutes we've discussed 2 events. We discussed Haran's death, and how possibly that affected Abraham's worldview of what it means to truly lose a child watching his own father. And we discussed, and which we mainly focused on, this episode of Ishmael. And how Ishmael is perhaps, I want to argue, the Akedah part 1. And now you have him being asked to do the Akedah part 2, and the whole event running through his head again, both either making it harder, as I think is easy to argue, or making it perhaps quote-unquote easier because he has experience in this realm. The final source is just the story also from yesterday's Parsha, negotiating for stone. We all know the story. Vayigash Avraham v'yomer ha'af tispet tzadikim rasha. Avraham approaches God and says, will you really kill a tzaddik? Will you kill a righteous person with a rasha? How can you do that? Will you stamp them out? Perhaps there's 50 tzadikim. Ha'af tispet lo tisas. You're going to save the place. L'makom laman 50 tzadikim asher b'kirba. Right, and then the most sharp pasuk in pasuk 25, last source, chapter 18, pasuk kafeh. Chalila lecha. Avraham has a chutzpah to say to God, Chalila lecha. How can this be? Me'asor kedavar hazeh lahamis tzadik im rasha. And then he says again, im rasha vayeh katzadik rasha. Chalila lecha. He says again, hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat. Will the true justice of the whole world not be just? To which God says, you're right. I won't do it. Okay, 50 there, fine. Okay, 45, 40, 30, 20, 10. God agrees. And I think the simple point from this story that probably many of us already realized is that from this story, from this event, which happens before the Akedah, right? It happened earlier last week's Parsha. The Akedah was the very last thing in yesterday's Parsha. This event proves to Avraham that he is dealing with a just God. God is just. He accused God of not being just, and God said, no, I am just. I'll agree. I'll follow your rules. So, one more thing that's going through his mind when he's walking up to this unthinkable act of the Akedah is, at least I'm dealing with a fair God. This seems unimaginable to me. It doesn't make any sense. You just promised me more than once, more than twice, that this child of mine will be the next leader of the Jewish people. He will carry on my beliefs, my passions, my family name. My idea that monotheism should spread throughout the world, and now you're telling me to kill him? It doesn't make any sense? Okay, but you're a just God, and somehow it'll work out. I don't know if he knew that Yitzchak would be saved, but somehow it'll work out.
Wow.
So I think the message for us, the point of the shir is not necessarily the message. The point of the shir is just interesting to try to get inside Avraham's head. We look at each event maybe sometimes by itself. There's the Akedah, there's Stom, this is who the different events, but Avraham's a person just like we're people. And we all live with our memories. We live with previous events. When we approach a new situation, we have what's going through our head from other previous situations. And perhaps these are some of the things, perhaps, that were going through Avraham's head as he went ahead and to go ahead and kill his own son. Maybe a takeaway message, though, perhaps, is the idea of challenges. Everyone in the whole world, everyone in this room, I'm sure, has faced challenges in their lives. And sometimes we don't understand. What does this challenge mean? How can God be testing us? How can He put us through this nisayon, this trial? Perhaps the Akedah and also these previous things. Avraham didn't understand why he had to send Ishmael away. He didn't understand why his brother died. He didn't understand why the whole city of Sodom was destroyed. I'm not saying they were only destroyed for this reason. We don't always see the whole picture, even in retrospect, but perhaps in retrospect, after the Akedah, many of his previous events of his life have a little more meaning, have a little more clarity. So perhaps for us, when we're going through a challenging time, we don't understand what it means to us. Maybe later on, maybe we see future events, we understand, oh, that really makes sense.